Hello, everybody. I hope you're having a nice break. And I just wanted to post this brief homework assignment for you to complete over break. As I said before, it's not going to be due until the Wednesday that we get back, but I'm going to post it now. So for those of you who have time, you can do it over break. So just to keep us moving along so that we don't fall too far behind, I wanted to get us to the Civil War as much as I possibly could for this break. So, with that in mind, I'm going to have us do a few things here. So, before I get going, I wanted to explain how this presentation is going to be broken up into four different parts. I'm going to talk about the causes of the Civil War. I'm going to talk about Lincoln emerging as a great leader. I find that a lot of people, well, everyone knows who Lincoln is, but very few people know anything really about him. Very few people really understand why he's considered to be such a great president. I'm going to talk about the war very briefly. You can take entire classes on the Civil War in college and go into tremendous amount of depth. I'm going to be talking about it in just the briefest of terms. And last but not least, we're going to talk about the debate about Lincoln and how Lincoln used his powers as president. Some would say abused his powers as president. Others would say, that he was the greatest president in American history. So, with that in mind, let's move along. And up to now, we've been talking about causes of the Civil War. And when we talk about causes of the Civil War, we're going to be talking about long term and short term causes. So, when we talk about a long term cause of the Civil War, that's the type of things that we debated in class when we talked about social, legal, political, economic causes of the Civil War. Almost all of those things were strongly influenced by slavery. When we talk about the acquisition of new land and the debate over whether or not that new territory would become slave or non-slave states, you might remember Ralph Waldo Emerson saying Mexico will poison us. So those are the long-term causes of the Civil War, and in many ways they're much more important. But when we talk about short-term or the immediate causes of the Civil War, we're going to be talking quite a bit about the election of 1860. So by the time 1860 rolls around, the country, of course, is been facing a decade of debate about the expansion of slavery, and that debate has become more polarizing and sectional and political and economic tensions between the different sections of the country have certainly become extreme at a boiling point. And by 1860, we see that the Democratic Party is going to be split. So Stephen Douglas, and I'm going to break down these guys for you in just a second. So Stephen Douglas had long been kind of the standard bearer of the Democratic Party. He had recently defeated Lincoln in a senatorial election. Famously, the Lincoln-Douglas debates come out of that 1858 Senate election in which Douglas wins. But in winning, Douglas really alienated many of the Southern Democrats, because many of the Southern Democrats believed that he didn't come out strongly in favor of slavery as much as they would have liked. This is going to lead the Democratic Party to split in the election of 1860. So Douglas will lose the Southern votes to John Breckinridge, who I kind of jokingly say I think he looks a little bit like Yosemite Sam. But John Breckinridge is going to be a Southern Democrat who's going to run for the presidency. And this is a rule in politics that almost always holds true. When one political party splits, the greatest beneficiary is, of course, the other political party. So when the Democrats split between Southern Democrats and Northern Democrats, we're going to see that's going to benefit Lincoln. John Bell is a guy who represents a new political party, a very short-lived political party called the Constitutional Union Party, in which all that they wanted was to keep the Union together. And this party represents the border states, as we're going to come to see them be called, the states that are both ideologically and geographically in the middle of the United States. And sometimes they support slavery, but they don't support secession. And John Bell represents that. And of course, Lincoln. Now, what I always like to point out is Lincoln today, of course, is on the $5 bill. He's a 30-foot granite statue in Washington, D.C. He's widely considered to be America's greatest president. But in 1860, Lincoln wasn't even considered to be the most notable person of his own political party. He was very savvy when it comes to politics, and he was able to win the nomination. But Lincoln was not highly regarded. He wasn't well respected. Like I said, even before, many members of his own political party didn't even hold him in high regard. So that's one of the interesting things about Lincoln, and I also think it's one of the great things about Lincoln. That he wasn't always seen as this icon. Famously, I say famously, Doris Kearns Goodwin, the historian, wrote a book about Lincoln that's become incredibly well known. Steven Spielberg essentially made a movie out of it called Team of Rivals, in which her whole thesis is that one of the things that made Lincoln great was that Lincoln was able to bring together all of these political rivals. So later, when we talk about Lincoln, we're going to talk about how his fellow Republicans oftentimes fought him and didn't see him as being the best that their party had to offer. But of course, Lincoln distinguishes himself. He benefited from the breakup of the Democratic Party and is able to win the election of 1860, of course. And just a quick look at the Electoral College for that election, you can see that Lincoln did not have a majority of the country support him. As a matter of fact, 60% of the country wanted someone else to be president. But because of the makeup of the Electoral College and because of the four candidates who were running, Lincoln was able to acquire almost 60% of the electoral votes, even though he only received about 40% of the popular votes. Similarly, Stephen Douglas received almost 30% of the popular votes, but was only able to get about 12% of the electoral votes. Breckinridge, of course, garnished all the votes in the South. And then it's interesting, this John Bell guy, who we'll never hear from again, he's not really overly important, but he does represent these border states in some ways. And these border states are going to be very important in terms of keeping the country together. Some of them will join the South in secession and others won't. But you can see that, as I said before, both ideologically and geographically, they're on the border. So America torn by sectionalism in 1860. Some would say we're torn by sectionalism today. This is a recent electoral vote. And you can see that these geographic distinctions kind of hold true. And even to today, these states in the middle are oftentimes states that have been known to swing, like Missouri, for example, which is oftentimes a state that can vote Republican or Democrat depending on the election. Whereas states like, say, the Deep South almost always in recent presidential elections anyway vote Republican. And of course, states like our own New York almost always vote Democrat. These border states, even today, are states that in some ways are ideologically as well as geographically on the border of American politics. So Lincoln is elected president. South Carolina immediately secedes. This should not be a surprise to us. South Carolina has long been associated with this strong states' rights idea, the nullification crisis, John C. Calhoun, for example. And it's interesting to note that the South votes Jefferson Davis to be its first and infamously last president of the Confederacy. Jefferson Davis, prior to becoming the president of the South, of the Confederacy, was Secretary of War. So it illustrated that the South, to a degree, expected that there would be a confrontation. Now, after Lincoln's election is elected, there's an immediate secession of what we refer to as the Deep South: South Carolina, Mississippi, Florida, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, Texas. But it won't be until later that other states, most notably Virginia, the most important of the southern states, ends up seceding. So also notable is who doesn't secede. So Delaware, Maryland, Missouri, Kentucky, all these states that have slavery, but are on the border, choose not to secede. Now, what's going on? The country voted for Lincoln, but as you know, there's this long period that we sometimes refer to as a lame duck period, in which the president elect is waiting to take office. And during this time period, the southern states seceded. Lincoln, of course, was questioned, what are you going to do? What are you going to do? And Lincoln's comments were disconcerting to a lot of people. Lincoln said, I don't know. I can't speak yet. It wouldn't be appropriate for me to say anything. I'm not the president yet. The person who was president at this time is widely regarded as one of our worst. James Buchanan. James Buchanan virtually does nothing, saying that, it's not his job, that Lincoln is the new president. So there's this period where the South had an opportunity to secede and establish a government and prepare for any future hostilities, in which Lincoln does nothing. Now, in Lincoln's defense, there's not much that he could do. Some people said that he could have issued stronger statements, but Lincoln chooses to say nothing. And as I said earlier, many people did not think Lincoln was up to the challenge to begin with. So this is going to cause a lot of people to not have high expectations for Lincoln's presidency. As we're going to find out in just a second, Lincoln is going to surprise everyone when he becomes one of America's strongest presidents. All right, with that in mind, I want to let you know that all of these slides that you see are available in the nearpod. So you can go through them at your own pace and have them to reference. And in between these presentations, as I said before, this little homework nearpod is going to be broken up into four little screencasts. In between these presentations, I have a few activities that I'd like you to complete. So I'm going to stop here, and I'm going to allow you to complete some of those activities, and then we'll pick up with Lincoln's emergence as a great president.